All right, everyone, we're ready to get started here. Thank you so much for coming. Again, in case you missed it earlier, my name is Daniel Malik. I'm the creative director here at View. For those of you who aren't familiar with View, or if this is your first time with us, we own and operate several studios around the country. We're based out of Tampa. We also have a studio here in Nashville, obviously, in Las Vegas and Orlando. We also build studios for clients all around the world and have about 15 partner studios in addition to the studios that we own and operate. Just to get a show of hands, how many of you, is this your first time at View? Okay, wow, that is great to see. Anyone have experience with virtual production, has been in this type of environment before? All right, cool, good to see some people are familiar with it, but also great to see that we have a lot of newbies. So for those of you who are new to virtual production, it is a very exciting technology, and for those of you who've worked in it before, you know how powerful it is and what it allows for. That is really revolutionizing the film, television, commercial, music video, etc. industries. So before we get started with the workshop, we're gonna show you a few different environments. But before we get started with that, I wanted to give a general overview of virtual production. There's a lot of different things that are at play in an environment like this. So the first thing to talk about is what's happening with the camera. So if you look here, we have a Venice 2 built out, and it has a few different components to it that are unique to virtual production. And I'm actually wondering, Nathan, who's our DP from Contrast Films, if you could talk to us a little bit about the build here and the different pieces of tech that we're utilizing.
Sure. So, hey, I'm Nathan Thompson, DP here in Nashville. I've had the opportunity to shoot here on the volumes quite a few times, so it's still every experience I learn something new, so I'm learning too. Yeah, the camera builds in here get kind of big, so if you wanted to set out to build out a DSLR, you probably could, but it's going to be awkward. So it's nice to have like a bigger body that you can mount to. So the main thing that we're mounting to the system, it's handy to have a Teradek so that your virtual operators can see what's going on too. It helps for the director, producer, especially the virtual team up there, to always have a picture so that when you're communicating on the headset, they see exactly what you're seeing. And then the main thing that's unusual, that's unique to this, is this MOSIS system. And so this basically has a lens on it, and it's looking at the ceiling. And if you see all these stars up here, that helps the camera know where it's positioned in 3D space. And then that talks to the Unreal system. So anytime we have an Unreal backdrop up and the camera's moving in and out, it's a true representation of 3D space, as if, when I walk away from you, everything compresses and gets closer together. When I walk closer to you, space expands and gets further apart. So the exact same thing happens in the world as the camera moves. So it represents real movement, which really sells the shot. And it's different than just putting a static image up there as a background and then moving. You don't have the parallax that you have when you have this system on interacting with the Unreal system. So it's basically just two components. This lens system up here that looks at the stars. You have to be aware, if you put a flag or diffusion over this and you block the stars, you will lose your signal. So you always have to be aware. I've forgotten that sometimes you're doing a Steadicam move or something and you go under diffusion, you're going to lose your connection. So then you just put stars on the diffusion. And you might have to recalibrate and things like that. But there's workarounds for that. And then there's just this other big box that powers this and connects to it and goes. So yeah, it's power hungry. So I always like to have a shark fin plate on the back of the camera so that you can hot swap or run two batteries at once. And that's pretty much the build.
Cool, thanks, Nathan. And one of the things to point out that in addition to the MOSIS tracking system is what's happening on the back end. So every second, basically dozens of times per second, the positional data of the camera is being sent into Unreal Engine in real time. And so what's happening is it's rapidly computing the positional data of the camera. It's talking to Unreal Engine, telling our virtual camera what it should be seeing, and then it's essentially displaying that in real time on the wall. And it has a really convincing look, like Nathan was saying, you're able to get really natural parallax. Grant is our virtual production operator here in Nashville. Let's give it up for Grant.
Hey guys. My life. Hey guys.
Grant, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the way that the tracking data is utilized in Unreal Engine and some of the benefits that we see for a virtual production application.
Yeah, absolutely. So like Daniel said, it's constantly sending positional data from the physical camera through the infrared tracking system that is positioned right above the lens that shoots out infrared light up into those white stars that you see that reflects it back down into a camera sensor on the same box. And then that data is transmitted to Unreal Engine a bunch of times per second to keep it live in real time. And that allows your frustum on screen to, assuming you calibrate correctly, be one-to-one in physical and virtual space with your real camera.
Yeah, and what's really cool about it is not just that, it's the camera tracking data in Unreal Engine. There's also several other components of processing that are happening. So in addition to the camera tracking data, we are processing and rendering an environment in real time in Unreal Engine. And so what that means is, depending on the size of the stage, we're using anywhere from 3 to 8 or more computers at a time to render an image that can scale to this resolution. This is something like 16K image, including the ceiling. Is that right?
Yeah. So our wall here in Nashville is 12,600 pixels by 2016. Each output, we use 3 computers total for rendering, and each computer has one viewport of 4,200 pixels. So replicated 3 times comes out to 12.6. And each image is stitched together through NVIDIA's Mosaic and GenLocking system.
Yeah, so that's happening. And then that data is also being sent, once it gets rendered, it's being sent to a video processor that's distributing it across the millions of pixels that you see behind us. And so that's happening, dozens of times in a split second with just several milliseconds of lag. And so it's a really impressive system that's finely tuned. And it's taken a lot of work and development across this industry to get it to a point where it is usable. And it's been a labor of love, but a lot of people are working really hard on this solution, and it's getting better and better every single day. So with that, now that you kind of have that foundational understanding of the technology behind virtual production, we want to show you some of the creative applications. So I'm going to welcome up our actors. We have Nick and Sabrina. You guys can come on up. Let's give it up for Nick and Sabrina. So they're going to go ahead and step into our first scene here. And like Megan mentioned earlier, we shot an entire commercial today before the workshop. We actually wrapped like 5 minutes before we opened doors. So if you're standing outside, that's why. We're also working on an edit, which, hopefully we are able to get it done in time for you to see before we end here. And you'll just have to not judge us from our first rough cut.
Are there any producers in the room that are sweating hearing that we wrapped 5 minutes before the workshop started? Anyone?
Yeah.
I was like, come on, Daniel, done.
Yeah.
One more take, that's it.
So with that, Megan, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the pre-production process that went into this, and then even like knowing, like putting your producer hat on, knowing that we wanted to capture several interior scenes, some of the advantages that virtual production allowed for, and what the pre-production process was like for today's shoot.
Yeah, so we decided that we were going to shoot interiors, so we knew kind of our locations that we wanted. And then we decided we kind of found some shots, inspiration shots, and the edit style that we liked, and then Daniel wrote a story to go with this. I said, hey, I need a living room, a kitchen, and a rooftop scene. So then Daniel wrote a storyline to go with it, and then Grant was working on the different environments, and then kind of last minute we pivoted because we had a springtime scene outside. It was really nice, green. And then we decided, let's make it a holiday theme. And so then Grant, I'm like, can you winterize that environment real quickly? And he's like, sure, Megan. I'm just like, type
that happened yesterday, too.
I'm like, can you just type in winter, please? No. And so he went in and took all the leaves off the trees, made it snow, and turned our environment into a snowy scene. And we did that yesterday during our art build and pre-light day. So we built all of this yesterday, we pre-lit yesterday, and then we shot 7 hours today, a whole commercial. And we were able to do that because we were so prepared and had everything pre-lit and set, and we literally were just in there, and we were just waiting on talent to change their wardrobe, basically. to move to the next set. So, what? And we had a lot of fun today.
Randy made sure we had fun.
Yes. We were the client today, so we had a great time shooting for ourselves today. But back to pre-pro. So yes, I think like we wanted to show the different types of ways that you could do interiors. So if you notice here in this, it's just the outdoor coming through the window. And so we were shooting through the window this way. We'll show you, we did a reverse scene where we're shooting back through into the living room, and we got really nice reflections from the wall onto the window. So that was really nice. And then we'll move to this kitchen where we used, I wanted to use a whole Unreal kitchen and just a few props in the foreground just to show like what a whole virtual space could look like. And then we used an Unreal cityscape as well and just built out minimal art there. So it was working with the art director. You know, I was giving her my vision and trying to figure out how we can build out 3 different sets in one space. You know, so we're trying to like squish them and be strategic that way with our art director, Jen Ward, who is amazing. She couldn't be here today, but we're grateful for her team. So it's fun collaborating, but you really have to work with art. You have to work with virtual art, which would be Grant, and doing that, and then working with the director as well to make sure that we're all on the same page. And then when one vision changes, you know, we all kind of have to pivot a little bit. And normally you're not dealing with the outside environment, but it was really easy to pivot because we went from spring to summer yesterday, you know, so that's the beauty of that. And the beauty of this also is going from one house, you know, we could have shot on location, but we couldn't have done a company move, done a house and a rooftop in 7 hours. And so we were able to do all 3 of these scenes really quickly.
Yeah, very cool. So with that, let's get into this first scene here. So like Megan said, we wanted to showcase kind of a hybrid type environment because one of the common misconceptions about virtual production is it's an extremely virtual, low art kind of shoot. But, you know, a lot of the times we're actually bringing in the same amount of art as we would on a typical shoot, especially for the foreground elements. We always say that when we've done our job, you don't even notice what's on the environment, and that starts with really good art so that, you know, you're not distracted and looking at things that you shouldn't be looking at that, you know, maybe weren't able to get cleaned up before the shoot. And so with that, we're going to go ahead and show you some actions here. And so to start off, when we have a nice little foreground element here that we can push through. And so how do you want to do this, Nathan? You want to actually just kind of run through the shots here? Cool. So we have our 2 actors, Sabrina and Nick. And so for this first shot here, why don't you guys just be talking? You know, you're getting to know each other. You're getting ready to play a Scrabble game. And we'll do a little bit of a push here on the dolly. All right, so we're rolling in 3, 2, 1, action. All right, looking great. So what you're seeing is, like Megan talked about, we have an environment out here. It's just a simple winter scene. It looks kind of like a night sort of vibe, you know, kind of dusk. One of the really cool aspects of that is with whatever we put on the wall, we can leave it there for as long or as little as we want to. Meaning, like you'll see in a little bit, we can have golden hour all day. We can have dusk all night. We can do whatever we want to do and have complete control. Also, if we need to add snow last minute, if we need to move the environment around a little bit. In fact, Drew, the placement of this tree back there is, you know, let's play around with that a little bit. Can we just move the environment to the right just a bit and see what that does for us? All right, and a little bit more. Let's do like a more dramatic move over to the right. Yeah, there we go. Let's just get that tree entirely out of there. There we go. And so now, you know, we have more of a just open waste. And actually, let's take it up a bit because I know there's a fence in this scene. So let's just bring that fence into frame if we want to. So yeah, just again, a really, you know, quick way to change things.
So one thing that we did here, this is an actual Unreal Engine environment, but we took an export render of this and put it up on the wall. So all 3 of these are just like screen grabs basically from the environment. And so right now, he is not in Unreal Engine using this. He's just using an export and then manipulating that. So sometimes it plays back easier if we're not using the frustum, then we can just use that. But usually we will edit and manipulate the environment to get it where we want, and then sometimes we will do this, especially if we're setting up several different scenes. But when we go to the kitchen scene, we'll go into actual Unreal Engine and show you how that works.
Cool. So now let's, if we can, let's get ready to switch to easy, and we're going to show the reflection shot outside the window, because this is one of the big reasons why we would want to build a physical set in an environment like this, is to get ambient lighting, to get reflections, that kind of stuff. And so we're going to do that quick. And Sadie, can you go ahead and stand up, and we're going to have you looking out the window in this scene, and then we're gonna see what this reflection looks like.
Grant, did you have anything you wanted to add about this while we're waiting?
Yeah. So, like expanding on what Megan said, using an Unreal Engine render rather than like a live video plate or actual footage is a big advantage, because it allows that same level of control you get in a live Unreal Engine environment. The only difference is now you're rendering it out and playing it back. But you still always have the option, if you have the time, to go back into the engine and make changes and then re-render it out, as well as keeping it totally synced with any other scenes you might have, and allowing you to bounce back and forth from plates to Unreal Engine. This is a workflow that, as an operator, I always highly recommend sitting down with DPs and directors to figure out what constitutes for a plate and what constitutes a live Unreal Engine environment, because you need them in, at different times for different things. This being one where we have a lot of heavy practical art, we can get away with plates, but where it's really just, like in the kitchen scene, just a table, you need that full parallaxing Unreal effect. It just depends on the nature of the shot.
Great. So this is starting to look good. Drew, I think we need to slide the environment over to the screen right a little bit. I'm seeing a little bit of fall off here. But yeah, as you're seeing, we have the reflection. And again, this is a really simple effect. This is something that is pretty common that we'll do. And again, it's something that's easy to manipulate. Let's say the scene called for a car driving up or that sort of thing. That would be something that we could very easily integrate into this. And like Grant was saying, we made this in Unreal Engine. However, you could use any plate. You could use any stock that you could get, from Film Supply or something like that, and stick on here, and you get a very similar effect. And so yeah, really great use case here. So what we're going to do now is we are going to transition to our fully virtual kitchen set. While we're doing that, are there any questions so far up to this point, either about virtual production in general, like we talked about, or this specific use case?
So say if we had our own plates already in mind, is there some kind of document you all provide that would say resolution minimums for, not the Unreal Engine stuff, of course, but just for like back plates, if we had stuff already in mind?
Yes, absolutely. So we do care about the plates. A lot has to go into it. And actually Grant may have more to say on this than I do, but we're thinking about things like frame rate. We're thinking about things like resolution and that kind of stuff. But yeah, I'll let you expand on that, Grant.
Yeah. So for our system specifically, we use Resolume Arena for all of our playback, and with that, typically MOVs, or specifically 422 LT MOVs and DXV3 codecs work the best. That said, we do have the ability to convert any other codec that we might need to. We also, for any sort of like animations or renders, we always recommend EXRs or PNG sequences. And then when it comes to resolution, it just depends on the wall you're shooting. So here in Nashville, if you need a graphic to take up the entire wall, it would be that 12,600 by 2016 absurd pixel ratio.
Good luck finding that online.
Yeah.
You gotta make it yourself.
However, for most cases, we'll typically make that smaller to fit just on the curve section, which would be around 8K, and then the flat wall, which would be about 4K.
Well, and another really good thing to call out with that is it is pretty rare that we would need to create something for the entire volume, even for just the curved section. You know, a lot of times we're really only caring about what is in frame. And so, like you just saw, we had a very small section. We scaled the plate down for behind the window, and then we duplicated it. And behind the actual plate, we scaled it up just for that ambient lighting and reflections. But you actually don't need a ton or a massive, 12K image. It really matters what's in your frame. Any other questions? Cool. All right, so we're going to move on to our next environment. So this is a kitchen scene. So I'll get you guys to come over in this scene, and we're going to do like a kind of like a coffee, morning coffee sort of vibe. So like we've been talking about already, the biggest advantage to shooting a more fully virtual environment is the level of control that you get. So we'll show you what some of that control looks like in a second here when we get camera back up. But, one of the things that we noticed early on yesterday during our pre-light was the color of the trim in the environment didn't match the color of the window that we had in our physical environment. And so it was a lot easier to change it virtually than to, run to the store and get some paint. And so we were able to just very quickly change the color of the trim and molding. And any notes on kind of the customization and flexibility of that, Grant?
Yeah, absolutely. You get to choose between hours of art painting and the cost of that, or a minute and a half and a few presses of a button to change that color. That is a big part of working in a virtual set is collaborating with the art department and making sure all of your practicals and your virtual match the same, color space and just feel natural together. And I think that's what really sets apart a good virtual production set is that blend from practical to virtual.
So maybe talk a little bit while we're getting set about the process that we incorporate with our virtual art department when it comes to building environment, optimizing it, prepping it, during pre-light, all that stuff. Why don't you just walk us through that a little bit?
Yeah. So it always starts with the storyboards. You got to figure out what the shoot needs and the blocking of everything. And with those first storyboards, you're able to start blocking out your environments and getting those primitive layouts set up. Once those have kind of been signed off on and you feel good about them, you can start moving into the texturing and the texturing, the coloring, the modeling, all of that, making it as perfect as you can. And that is where a lot of the cohesion between art and the development come up is pretty early in pre-pro. And then as you get closer to the shoot, your background starts to look more and more realistic. And then eventually, once art and the virtual finally get to meet on set together, more often than not, you realize that they don't match as well as you thought they did in pre-pro. Go figure. So that pre-light day is always crucial to really hone that in and really get everything exactly the way that you want it.
Very cool. So with this, before we get started, Drew, I'm wondering if we can just quickly switch away from Unreal Engine, just so we can showcase what is practical versus what's virtual in this environment. And let's just go all black on the wall. Again, so there you can see, the minimal amount of art we have. So we have a table, we have some coffee stuff. Other than that, everything else you're seeing is virtual. We also, if you tilt up a little bit, Nathan, we added a couple practical lighting fixtures in here, just for that extra little bit of foreground elements here. So with that, let's go ahead and switch back to Unreal Engine. All right, and we'll get started. So for this first scene, here's what I want to see. Maybe Sabrina, why don't you grab the coffee pot, step off this way a little bit, and then on action you can kind of come and walk in and maybe pour it into the 2 mugs for us, okay? So let's see what that looks like, and then looking for some good energy from you too, Nick. All right. Here we go. In 3, 2, 1, action. All right. Now we're getting our coffee on. And then Nathan, let's push in on this when you got a second. So as you see, as Nathan's moving around and he's pushing in, you're seeing the environment track with him. It's kind of hard to see from where you're seated right now, but you can see on the wall this window that's moving around, that's the frustum. So that's what's being rendered and tracked in real time. The rest of the environment surrounding here is static. We are able to change elements in it as needed, but we're using it more for ambient lighting. It's not really too important what's on it other than that. And so, as you can see, we're having a little bit of dialogue. Let's have a little bit of a laugh. Maybe Nick, you could tell a joke, and we'll get that going. And then Sabrina, why don't you fix Nick's hair a little bit? He has that a little straight hair coming down there. Got it coming down a little bit. There you go. That's looking great. So there's a couple things that I want to show here, and within the environment, some of the things we can change. So to start off with, let's go ahead and change some of the props that we have on the counter. So, and you may know exactly what we're able to change on here, Grant. So you just let us know what we can change, and Drew will do that for us.
Drew, if you see that paper towel roll on the microwave, go ahead and mess around with that a little bit.
And maybe we even just delete it.
Yeah,
since, oh wow,
Dang.
That-
I think there's some nuts on the counter over there if you want to fly those into frame. Oh, floating nuts. Yeah.
Nice.
So everything back there is totally editable and movable. All of this is very easy to do on the fly. I also think it's very important, especially when shooting virtual interiors specifically, is to really nail that clutter if you're going for a super realistic look. I mean, real spaces are messy, So I think just having that kind of busier counter with the dish soap and the plates and the plants back there just really helps make it feel more real. And on top of that, making it feel more real, I think the way Nathan is shooting it right now, nice and tight with some good bokeh in the background, is always a great way to shoot virtual, specifically interiors. You could see in those close-up shots earlier where it was just the actor and the virtual. I mean, you pretty much couldn't tell it was virtual. With interiors, shooting into corners is always really good because it gets you that extra step of depth that you wouldn't necessarily get if the background was just flat. It's a big reason why our stages are curved the way they are so often. And so if you see back here, we get this corner line right here that really sells they're standing in that room and just makes it feel more real rather than, it feeling kind of green screeny and just flat back there.
Yeah, and you're really getting a lot of those benefits of the ambient lighting that the volume provides, and that is one of the unique advantages to shooting ICVFX or in-camera visual effects versus virtual production on a green screen. The volume provides some really nice ambient lighting. It's also a lot better for our talent, which you'll see a scene that we're going to do later on with the rooftop. You're able to look around, see what's around you, any reflections. So Nick, could you go ahead and just pick that Chemex up for us so we can just see, try and capture some of the reflections? Like if this was a green screen, that would almost be unusable to be able to key out that perfectly without a significant amount of touch up. But here it's just a really simple, you just use what you have and it works.
Benny has some comments from a gaffer's point of view about lighting and this setup.
Hi guys, I'm Benny. I'm a chief lighting technician. Lighting for a volume is a big conversation, which I would love to have with you guys. But for this scene in particular, I can tell you what will make this a lot easier. Just what can make this world a lot easier for you. I don't know how much you guys know about 3D space and designing in 3D space or lighting in general, but real easy. Under these cabinets, you can see in the corners of the rooms, these kinds of things. You can see these shadows right from these cabinets, then how they fall off and interact with the wall behind them. That's called an occlusion. We can match those same shadows in design underneath people's chins on objects that are practical props that are on the table. If we matched our shadows and how the light from the world falls off to how the light from our world falls off, we can take a lot of shortcuts for how we want to light these things. So that's, from my perspective, I'm focusing on a lot of things like that. Reflections are lovely in here because, God, they do the work for you. You don't have to hang lights to motivate stars or any of that. So the reflections are amazing. Love that part of the game, but I'll just tell you guys, as you're kind of watching through today, if you have questions about lighting, I'm happy to answer those. But matching the shadows is how we really make this technology work for us as lighting technicians.
Yeah, and so one of the really practical ways that we do that, which if you want to add to this, Benny, feel free, is controlling spill onto the wall. That's kind of one of the biggest things that we are always looking out for is spill on the wall. And, I'm actually wondering, once they get the camera back on the dolly here, maybe we could demo it real quick. So let's frame up the scene, and then let's just pan one of our lights at the wall. All right, so they're going to do that for us, and then you'll see some of the separation start. Another thing that I want to point out is, in a position like this, scale is really important. And so if we're going for a wide, we may play around with scale, because as you see, when we're this wide, they kind of feel tiny in the environment. So that's another really important aspect, which maybe you want to touch on, Grant.
No, absolutely. That's that flatness that I was, talking about earlier. So you can really see the difference between those tight shots and this wide shot here with the counter just kind of going directly across. It feels much more manufactured green screen, which is just wanted to further hammer in the point that angles are your best friend on a volume. You want those leading lines. You want to see them create that depth for your talent. Yeah.
So, Benny and I are always working together trying to shape the scene, make sure that it's motivated. Like Benny said, the sun in the scene is coming from this direction, so that's where the majority of our key lights are. And then one thing I'm always doing, I always like to have a monitor that has false color on it. And I'm always checking the shadow levels of the real world with the shadow levels of the virtual world. So I'm constantly switching back and forth, making sure that, that the shadows here on the table, say for example, if that is a shadow, it's kind of a mid-tone more, are at least matching the mid-tones of our virtual world. And usually what that means is a lot of times the wall is too bright, so we're bringing the brightness down, and then we're crunching the blacks. It is a challenge to get the blacks on the wall to be as rich and dark as the blacks in the real world, but getting those to match your highlights and your shadows is always something that Daniel and I are also he's always keeping me in check. He's like, are our shadows washed out a little bit? Because that's one thing. If you don't nail that in real time, you're probably not going to nail that in color. Because if they're off, you're just globally adjusting shadows, unless you're doing some fancy roto work. So you really need to balance them here so that when you adjust your shadows in post, they're equal. And that's always a fun challenge.
Do you want to jump back? They were demoing the light on the wall.
Yeah, let's put that back on. And to piggyback off of what Nathan was saying, in virtual production, especially ICVFX, what you see is what you get. And that can be a really good thing. But if you're not planning properly, then that can also be a nightmare. So we always are making sure that, whether we're doing a shoot in our studios or a client is coming in and doing something, that we are, especially for those first few times, holding hands, making sure that all of those extra layers are taken into account.
So what they're doing here is kind of aggressive, and no one would actually do that. But I do have a lot of first-time clients that come in, and they're always so gracious and want to lean on us for help and advice, and are eager to learn. And so one thing that I'm always pointing out is, hey, your lights are washing out the blacks, and try to flag those or pull those off the wall some more. A lot of times people will try to get lights right close to the wall to light something, and so we're always recommending bringing your set out from the wall 10, 15 feet. The further you can bring it out, the better, so that your light spill isn't on. We even use the ceiling to light sometimes, and on occasion, if we make it super bright, it's spilling onto the wall too. So that's just something that you're always going to want to watch out for.
So from a practical perspective, we're always using black solids and floppies to control the light. You can see the Sky Panel S60 there has an egg crate on it that focuses the light beam. We're always trying to control light off the wall if we can. If you haven't used false color before, all that is just, it's assigning a different color to different values. So you can see, say this was our shadow level, this is blue is our shadow level. you can see that obviously the shadows in the scene are totally green, which is more of a mid-tone. So we would want to either control that light or crunch the shadows with our virtual operator.
Yeah, thanks. And what you're seeing right now, nothing has been changed in the environment as far as lighting. This is all a physical lighting change that is now affecting the wall. So, like Megan said, it's a big no-no.
Yeah. I'm going to keep us on time.
Cool.
I'm going to have Drew jump over to our rooftop scene while we take some questions about this
Cool.
scene, or any questions. It'll take a few minutes to bring up the next environment.
So the question was, are we limited to prime lenses? And so anytime we do a shoot, and we're, especially with first-time DPs who haven't used this technology before, we're doing camera tests. We're coming in, even, before a pre-light day, we encourage anyone who is shooting for the first time to come in and play with the technology at no cost. And so what that means, though, is it gives an opportunity to test those things. So if you have a specific lens you want to use, we'll find a way to make it work. And to answer the question specifically, yes, you can use zoom lenses. Depending on, the throw of the zoom, it may not always be necessary to make tweaks to Unreal Engine and to the hardware. However, what we have the ability to do is essentially put a gear that's kind of like a focus gear onto the lens that integrates with our camera tracking system, and then it talks to Unreal Engine, and so then it knows the focal depth. And that can also work with focus and that kind of stuff, so that as you change focus, it can change your focus in the environment more accurately. So,
And real quick to expand on that, that it is something that is absolutely amazing to use on set, and it is also something that takes a good amount of prep work on the front end. So if it's something that seems right for your production, it's definitely good to mention it very early on to the virtual production team.
Because we have to calibrate the lens for it.
Yes.
Yep. Yeah.
All right. Preface.
All right, we had another question here.
In the last scene specifically, one of the things I was catching with my eye was there was a lighting fixture that in the scene should have been creating some backlight on the subjects. However, it's not active. There's no way. You would have to actually kind of get some sort of lighting fixture. My question is, are you able to control some of those virtual lighting assets that you have in Unreal to get some of the real-time or real-world effect that you would get from a light that's in a natural place?
Yeah.
Or are you having to actually get up there and rig something to make it work?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the power of the volume, it really is for ambient environmental lighting. It's not really going to be a good fit for a motivated lighting source. However, what you're able to do, which is what we've done, is we've created additional lighting, added additional lighting fixtures, that kind of stuff into the scene. In this case specifically, though, let's say there was a virtual light that you wanted visible in your scene, and then you needed to motivate it with a physical light. What we're able to do is actually wire DMX into Unreal Engine, and so you can select a virtual light that talks to a physical light, and then when you change it virtually in the environment, it also changes it physically through DMX. So
You'll see in the commercial edit tonight, there's when we made, because we got multiple looks out of that scene, we did more of a sunrise look, and then we did more of a bright daytime look. And in the bright daytime, we had a backlight, because there is a backlight there, we just had it a little more subtle on this scene. But we really cranked it up, and it was actually, that practical light was flaring out the lens, so that you have that, you feel like you're there.
Yeah, if you want
But really, the wall
at
is just...
the BMW spot on our website. We used a lot of flares on that really, make it feel like you're really outside.
Yeah. All I was going to add is that you are obviously in Unreal Engine, you're able to add any shape or type of light that you want to. But like Daniel said, the limitation of the wall is that they're lit pixels, so you're not going to actually be able to motivate it through the virtual light itself. It is a great way to motivate the practical light through seeing it in the frustum, if that makes sense. Yeah.
The frustum is the visible part of the...
yeah, that's that box that's bouncing
It's
around.
the big box.
Yeah. Any other questions before we move on? Cool. All right, we have one in the back over here.
Forgive me, another question. So say if our art director already had the foreground and then designed the background for it, I'm assuming, do you all have the people who can turn that into their background they designed into an Unreal environment? And what's a lead time on something like that?
You're saying if we had a production designer who already had a
Right.
virtual environment?
If we had the set, how we wanted the background to look, can you all make it Unreal?
Yeah. So
And what's the lead time on a project like that?
The lead time varies. It does depend on the complexity of the environment and how custom it needs to be. So we have a large library that we call our digital backlot of hundreds of environments that we've either built ourselves or that we've just acquired through different projects, and we are able to license. And essentially, a lot of times that's pretty sufficient for most cases. Is, let's say, a desert scene. We do a lot of desert scenes, and we essentially are able to use the same environment and then just make customizations to it based on the client's needs. And so in that instance, you're talking less than a week to get that environment ready to go. Yeah, so something custom, you're looking typically from like 4 to 6 weeks is what we recommend. That being said, we sometimes do things a little quicker than that.
We do tight turnarounds,
Yeah.
but yes, we normally say like 3 to 6 weeks, depending on the scope. But we do like digital twins as well. So we've worked with drugstores. We're working with a few other companies to recreate. We'll go in and get their CAD files and use that as reference to create an actual store. So you don't have to close it down to shoot in. You can always just shoot in a virtual space. And so those are more robust and take like 6 weeks to build out. But something like this kitchen scene that we had was a kitchen scene we had already used in a previous shoot, and we just went in and changed the cabinet colors, the wall color, and added some more stuff on it. And so we were able to repurpose it.
Yeah. Good question, though.
Anything else before we move on to this scene?
Cool.
All right.
So what we have here is a cool rooftop exterior scene. What's really neat about this is it required pretty minimal art. You see we have a faux brick texture and then a guardrail, which, I would not recommend getting too close to if you were on a real roof because you could fall off. And our talent would be very much at risk of that, which would be a big no-no on an actual location. But, for this, it's not a big concern because it's not an actual rooftop. So, let's get a few shots here, and let's, do we have the frustum going on this? All right, cool. So, Nick and Sabrina, why don't you kind of center up, kind of like where we were a little earlier, and let's just do a simple push-in on this. I'll give you an action, Nathan, and we'll just, we'll see how this looks here. All right, here we go. In 3, 2, 1, action. All right, so you guys are talking. You'll notice a couple things that we did with the scene here. We added some stuff to the ground to dirty it up. In other scenarios, we may add, some other texture if we really wanted to, add like gravel or that kind of thing to make it a little more accurate. But for this case, we just kept it simple. We also added the foreground element of the smokestack there with a little bit of fog coming out of it, which is a nice touch. But as you see, with this environment, you're seeing that frustum that's growing as Nathan backs the camera up, and it gets smaller as he goes in, and you're seeing the environment compress and decompress, and exactly like it would, if it was your eyeballs. And so I do want to see if we can show an example. Drew, is it possible to just turn the frustum off real quick, just to see what this looks like if we don't have camera tracking going? So in this instance, we still are running Unreal Engine, and I wanted to show this because sometimes for an environment that's an exterior like this where your background objects are far enough away, you're able to actually get away with a somewhat convincing use case like our end result with using a plate. So what you're seeing is essentially the same effect that a plate would have since the background isn't being live tracked. Now it is a little different, and for those pixel peepers, which I'm sure there's a lot in the room, you can notice that the environment is not parallaxing and isn't doing what it should be doing. So let's go ahead and turn the frustum back on. And so now we have the proper tracking. And Could you guys come a little bit closer this way? So you may be noticing this a little bit, which is another thing that we're always thinking about when we're shooting in the volume, and that is moire. So if you get too close to the wall, in fact, I'm wondering, Nathan, if you can actually focus on the wall for a second, so we can showcase this. So I was noticing it a little bit because we were a little bit too close to the wall earlier, but what you'll start to get is some moire pattern. So if you see that there, that's another one of those big no-nos that you never want to see in virtual production. And so, again, this is something we're always trying to avoid. The fix is just don't get too close to the wall. And it has a lot to do with, the science behind sensor size and pixel density. This LED wall is a 2.9 pixel pitch. So, all those things kind of work together to kind of determine how far away from the wall you can get. So certain cameras can get closer than others. But our kind of general rule of thumb is to keep talent at least 8 feet off the wall, or whatever your subject is, at least 8 feet off the wall. So again, you're seeing the environment here. Let's say we wanted to change time of day. We're in golden hour. The beautiful thing about virtual production is we can stay in golden hour as long as we want. We don't have to worry about the sun going down, but we can also switch to, we just switched to daylight. And so I think we're going to change the lighting as well, so it's a little bit more motivated to daylight versus golden hour. Oh, actually now we're nighttime. So, we're all over the place right now. But again, it's just a really powerful aspect of this. Also, what we were shooting earlier, we had a little bit more of tall buildings in the background. Drew, could we rotate the environment to show some of those taller buildings behind our talent there? Here we go. So again, just a very simple thing. If you need to change your framing, if you want to make some adjustments, you can do that very easily in real time. And it's pretty simple. One of the things we like to say a lot too is, you want to plan for the unknowns when you're shooting in virtual production. Not every single thing can be changed. Like, let's say we wanted to add a specific building in. Well, we would need to know that in advance. Like if we're adding, let's say, like Times Square or something like that, we would need to know in advance that we were going to do Times Square. It's not something like, on set, I want more of a Times Square vibe, like with LEDs and stuff. Like, no, we got to plan for that. But we always want to go into shoot knowing what we need to be, or what we don't know. And so another good example of that is like if we go back to the desert scene, let's say we don't know what color the sand is going to be that our physical art department is bringing in. That is something that, is a very real scenario that we faced before. And so going into that shoot, we need to have the ability to change our sand color to whatever it needs to be, which, sometimes that's easy to do out of the box depending on the asset you're working with, but sometimes you do have to bake that sort of functionality into the asset beforehand. And so those are some of the different things when we are, planning for a shoot. We always want to know what we don't know, because then we can plan to adapt quickly on set. Anything to add, Grant or Megan or Nathan, to this scene? Any thoughts?
Yeah, so this scene specifically was a lot of fun to set up because it's a very versatile one. It's one you can use for a lot of ends, and as Daniel was saying, it's very, very malleable. I think it's always important to keep an eye on perspective for sure, and it's something that it's easily overlooked if you haven't shot in virtual production before, because when you live in the real world, you just assume perspective will be correct. Where in this type of environment, it is just not the case. So we have to make sure that our viewpoint in the world is high enough up to be motivated to be, on top of the building and far enough away from the buildings to give a convincing parallax effect to make it feel realistic. And so all of that comes from looking at examples of real cities and trying to, gauge distance. Unreal Engine does work in real imperial and metric measurement systems, and we find ourselves using those systems a lot to try and get it as photoreal as possible.
Very cool. Oh man, it's crazy.
Months.
Actually, it's hilarious. I was just telling Megan today, the last time I shot on a rooftop, it was in New York City, and it was windy, it was noisy. We had, all like our 12 by blowing over and had to have grips standing on it, and it was a nightmare. And also, it was a sunset scene, so we were up against sunset. And so being here is like, oh my goodness, don't have any of those worries. In fact, we actually brought a fan in during our shoot to add some wind effects to it.
Yes, you can see it right there. We brought in a snow machine and a wind machine, and so we were adding all the elements to our sets. So any elements like that, especially if you're shooting an outdoor scene, we've had beach scenes in here, and they have plants, and we match the plants in the virtual world, but the practical plants are not moving. So it's those things that you have to remember. Oh, that would be moving in real life, so we need to add some sort of movement there. Or when we were shooting through this window, when we got the window, it was very clean, so we were trying to dirty it up and use a steamer to fog it up and to add mist, because we had snow falling as well through or in front of the window, and so we were trying to dirty that up, and so just trying to make it feel as real as possible with those weather elements.
Yeah, and there's a lot of different layers that contribute to that. Even the glass you shoot with, and the different lens diffusion that we're using on this. Knowing the effect that we're going for, it's like a romance story. We want it to be bloomy. We want it to have that nostalgic feel, and so those were some of the motivating choices. But anytime you can add a more organic texture to what you're doing, in this case, we are on some anamorphic glass. That just helps, solidify the realism and give even more believability to it. If you're being organic with your camera movement, that kind of stuff, all of those creative choices, virtual production adapts really nicely to. Cool.
All right. Any other questions? We do have an edit from today.
Oh, we do. Cool.
It's not final, but we have a rough edit to show you guys, just to show you what we've been working on all day, and to show those elements that we added in throughout the day. But before we show that, do you guys have any other questions for us?
Yeah, we have one back here.
Here, hold on. I'm going to bring you the mic.
So is the background always needs to be sharp, or are you blurring it all?
We are actually blurring it a little bit. So, Drew, do we have it blurred right now? Yeah, so that's actually a good call out, because when we were shooting this earlier, we did blur it a little bit since the buildings are pretty far off. You do, if you were shooting this for real, you would need it to be somewhat soft because it's further away. So that is something that we're able to easily control. And like we were saying earlier, if we are calibrating a lens to the to Unreal Engine, then that's kind of baked in as well. So the focus, it'll adjust based off of, like Grant said, the physical dimensions that Unreal Engine operates in. But a lot of times that's not necessary, so we're just manually, changing focus.
One of the ways that I think about, every scene, I think about this as if you're live coloring. You have control over everything. Your color temperature, it's sort of like double gaffing in a way. You're picking your light intensity, your light quality, your light position, your color temperature. You're doing that in the real world, and then you're doing that in the virtual world, or vice versa, really. Hopefully you're setting your virtual world and then motivating your real world off of that. But you could, one of the biggest lessons I've learned and continue to kind of fine tune is, as a DP, I'm constantly talking to I think of the virtual operator kind of as a virtual DP in a way. I'm like, okay, where's our depth of field at? And they're like 0.8 millimeters. And I'm like, what does 0.8 millimeters mean? I don't know yet, but you learn together, because Unreal has its own values. It's not the same as the values on my lens, but through the conversation, you get a feel okay, 300 millimeters is a really shallow depth of field. 1,000 millimeters is pretty razor sharp. So you start to learn this language of okay, black levels, I tend to like them at 0.8. Depth of field, if I want it really soft, I might go to 300 millimeters. And you just develop that language, and you get better and quicker as you really fine tune your environments to match your world.
Nathan and I have a lot of fun conversations trying to translate filmmaking lingo to game design lingo. It's a lot of fun.
It's honestly my favorite part because you're literally learning a new language and you're starting to get more comfortable with it, and you have great people like Grant to make it easy.
Great DPs like Nathan that want to learn. It's always so fun.
Yeah, and that is an important call out. Is Unreal Engine it's a game designing platform, and so they have done a lot of work. The Epic team, we work very closely with them. They've done a lot of really good work over the past several years to bring more film friendly tools into the ecosystem. But it's still it's one of those things that every day there's a lot to work on, and it is getting better. But that translation is important.
Absolutely. All right, I think we've got that rough edit ready for you guys.
All right, where are we looking at here?
You started off with a look you gave. You spread over and over among us. When we were younger. When we were younger. I had in mind to keep an eye on you. Watch you fill the room without a whisper. When we were younger. When we were younger. We'd sit around to see your point of view. Watch you give an inch and take the moment there. When we were younger. And still I had my breath, and like it was my last one. But you still lay right in front of us. You still lay right in front of us. Like when I saw you for the first time. Every memory, every moment, you reminding what I've been missing here. When I saw you for the first time.
3, 2, 1, action.
All right, cool. Well, let's give it up to Alex who edited that in real time today. Yeah, great job, man. Definitely keep an eye out for that. We're gonna add some more polish and then publish it. Thanks, Ryan. Awesome. So, yeah. With that, any other questions about that? What you just saw, or anything that we've been discussing tonight? Happy to answer those. Yes.
Here.
So we have 3 sets here tonight that you guys worked on today. How often would you do like a multi-set setup like this, and what's the most that you guys have ever squeezed in here?
Ooh, good question. That's a dangerous question.
Well, I can speak for Nashville.
So this is actually a pretty common thing that we do for our clients. Basically, if you book the studio, you can shoot however much or however little you can fit into a 12 to 16 hour day or whatever you want to shoot.
So,
we
don't recommend 17 or 18 hour days.
No. We can cram as much as you are able to, and we kind of help build those schedules. Since we have producers like Megan who are on staff who have a lot of experience in environments like this, we are able to work to do that. And so, you can speak to Nashville.
I think we have done 3 several times. Usually we're doing 2. So we're setting up one here and we're setting up one here for pre-light. We have gone to 4 different cities in 3 days, but those were really big builds. And so we went to like Miami, Chicago. Nathan was on that shoot. Where else did we go? LA. So anyways, we went to 4 different cities in 3 days, but the art build was massive. And so we were building out like soccer fields and brought in sod, and we've creating beach scenes. So, I mean, we did do in 3 days 18 different looks, which I wouldn't recommend. And at the end, they were like, you were right, that was too much. But I would say building something out like this on your art build pre-light day, we were fortunate enough to be able to build the art in the morning, and then these guys pre-lit really quickly the second half of the day. And, you know, we've worked in this space a lot. So sometimes we're doing an art build day, an optimization day with your environments to get those locked in. And then we're pre-lighting and walking through every shot. So then on shoot day, your client comes in, your talent comes in, and you're just ready to roll through each set.
Yeah, and it also depends on the level of production value. You know, obviously we value very high production value in virtual production. However, I will tell you, one of the first clients we ever had in our Tampa studio was a local car dealership. They own car dealerships all throughout Florida, and they came in once a month for 4 hours, and we shot 60 spots for them. In 4 hours, because they were these short little 10-second things that would air. We set up 3 or 4 cameras and just would change the background. They'd roll on it, do 1 or 2 takes, move on to the next one. It's all teleprompter, so it's we were
glorified green screen.
Yeah. So in that scenario, you can get a lot, but
Yeah.
you know, we do pride ourselves, and this industry as a whole pride itself on high production value. That, you know, is one of the big advantages.
Yeah. We had another question over here.
Yeah. I was wondering if you could talk about the limitations as far as frame rates, and can you do any slow motion at all, or how does that work?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. We do face limitations with frame rates, and Nathan and I were just talking about this today. It is one of those constant battles. Our different studios offer different advantages. I'm not sure exactly what the specifications are here, but you can shoot up to 48 frames per second, depending on which studio you're at. I think one of our studios, you can shoot up to 60 frames per second, but you kind of run into certain limitations as well with going beyond that. So the big problem is, in order to do, let's say, 120 seconds, it's possible. There's panels out there that have that quick of a refresh rate. Unreal Engine is capable of it, but it's like a domino effect that affects a lot of things. It obviously affects the processing power needed to run frame rates that high. You know, you need to double or triple or even quadruple your computer power behind that. And then also, probably the biggest downside to that is the physical limitation of the refresh rate. So, you know, a panel can refresh 120 times per second, but each of those refresh rates, or each of those exposures, the lighting that the panel is outputting is far less than if it's doing, you know, 30 frames per second or 60 frames per second. And so, and you need, as you know, a lot of light when you're doing slow motion, so it's not ideal for the panel to be operating at a lower light capacity. So there's a lot of innovation currently happening right now on the LED technology to make them more capable, but I think we're still probably 2 or 3 years away from being able to do true high-speed slow motion.
Yeah. Do you want to tell them what our settings are here specifically?
Yeah, so we shoot 24 flat, not 23.98, it's 24 flat, and 144 degree shutter angle. So then when you go to 48 frames, which is totally fine, then you just double your shutter speed. So then you go to, I believe, 288 degree shutter. Math. But yeah, so you go to a 288 degree shutter, you lose a significant amount of light. But you can totally do it. I think, and I believe we did test 60. I don't know what the math is there, 2.5 or whatever. But you just do that math, and then your shutter speed gets really high. So, yeah, actually, no, that's a slower shutter. Somebody should have called me out on that. 288 degree shutter is slower, so you actually get more light, but you get more motion blur, which is weird, right? So if you shoot 60, usually you want your frames pretty crispy, and you're actually introducing more motion blur at an even almost 360 degree shutter. So it's really up to you. Maybe if there's not a whole lot of motion, maybe not a whole lot of camera movement, you might be able to get away with it. At 48 and 288, that's still a lot of motion blur, but we've done it, and it's been fine. So just look at it, see if you like it. If you don't do it.
So is there a way to keep the update, the frames of the panel to be in sync with the sensor of the camera?
Yeah. So for that we use Genlock. which again, it's not necessary for every shoot. That's why Nathan mentioned the camera settings that we use. If we stay within those camera settings, that's what the panels and the processor are essentially calibrated to, and so we're able to shoot without gen locking. The reason for that would just be flexibility. It's less things that need to be part of the pipeline, and so you don't need to be tethered, all that stuff. It adds some creative flexibility. That being said, at some of our studios, just based on the panels, we require gen locking. And so when you do gen lock, you're able to have a little bit more flexibility in your camera settings. You can shoot at 2398 if you want to. You can not limit yourself to 144 shutter. You can shoot at 180, all that kind of stuff. So gen locking provides a little bit more control, but it also does introduce other limitations, depending on what you're going for.
Any other questions? Yes, in the back. And then probably we have time for one more question after his, and then...
Are you having to do a lot of color correction in post for like seeing your actual subject versus your background and getting that to sort of match up? Or how is that being affected in your overall production process?
So are you asking about like what the color workflow is like in post for ICVFX?
Ideally, we're matching color in real time as perfectly as possible, because if your real world and your virtual world have a lot of differences, then that creates a lot of complications in color. So the better composited and matched everything can be, the better off you are. Whether it's black levels, match those, color temperature, match those, so that way when your colorist is adjusting things, it's all in sync, it's all even.
Right.
One thing you really got to get...
Yeah, so you're matching the virtual set to real-time color temperatures, real-world color temperatures, right? Is that...
Okay, so it's really all about like what you want to see. I'm not like asking Grant like, hey Grant, is the wall at 5600, so I'm putting my camera at 5600. I'm usually just going by eye.
Okay.
So I like to set my camera a lot of times at 4300 because that allows lights at 5600 to be quite blue and lights at 3200 to be more warm, and you get like a color separation. So that's one thing I like to do because it gives the colorist lots of flexibility and you have nice color separation. Today we shot on a camera that shoots raw, so in post you can change your color temperature, which is really nice. One thing this wall is calibrated, which is really good. Before it was calibrated, you had to really watch out for like green and magenta shifts. And the thing is you can't be like, oh, the blacks on the wall are magenta, I'm gonna do minus green on my camera. Because then that shifts the real world, right? You're fixing a problem and creating a new problem. So you've got to communicate with the virtual operator to be like, okay, let's shift the wall green, and then everything matches. It's all about matching everything together.
That's great. Yeah. You have 10 seconds.
Yeah, so compositing in general it's a lighting game. There are a lot of things that can sell it, but the reason the practical props are great is so that you have something to light, right? That's what art is there for, is to take the shadows and design a contour to the space. So as we're lighting, a couple things to keep in mind here with this technology is this is not from the film world. This is from live performance world. So how color space works in live performance lights, with these gobos and these lights that you see on this grid up here, is different than how color space and gamut works inside of our film lighting space. So we aren't going to get a 5600 Kelvin ceiling that's going to be keying us top down. We're going to take lights that are color adjustable and come in here and adjust our lights to the world like we would at a practical location. So if we want to find a ceiling, we're going to fine tune the tools that we have for live lighting, adding green, adding blue, adding red, adding different shades to get close to the color that we want, and then we're going to take our lights and conform those to the world that we've created. So it's a little bit different compositing lighting process.
Basically, use RGB lights. If you can, use RGB lights because there may be green and magenta shifts on the wall, and you want to be able to correct our lights. Like if you just use an Aperture 600D, it's a great light, but if the wall is green, there's no way you're going to match that light to the wall. So use RGB lights if you can.
Cool. And time for one more question.
Well, no.
Okay.
I did want to say there are a few things that we want to say before we wrap up, and I wanted to point out some key people that will stay behind to answer any more questions that you guys might have, but I want to be courteous of your time. I did want to say a big thanks to our talent today who,
Give it up for Sabrina and
thank
Nick.
you so much. They were amazing. Real quick, I'm putting them on the spot. How did it feel to work in a virtual studio?
It was my first time, and it was a very unique experience, and I'm excited to see where it goes.
Any pointers or cool things?
I loved it. We whipped out our phones any chance we could get because it literally looked like we were on a rooftop and getting like the coolest pictures. So it was really cool. Like even looking at the screen, I was like, it was wild. It was a really cool experience. So just enjoying it and acting natural because this really does so much of the work for you.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for being here today and helping with our workshop because I know that's not what they originally signed up for. It was just the shoot. And then, surprise, we also have a workshop. And I wanted to point out real quick, and then I know Randy wants to say something really quickly too, and then Daniel will close us out. But Daniel, if you have questions about pricing or logistics or what it looks like to work here in this space, Daniel, myself, Randy right here in the hat, Brad right here, and Bree will be available to answer any of those questions. But feel free to jump in and ask Grant, Nathan. Well, they're going to start striking probably soon, but Grant is available to answer any questions, virtual questions you might have as well. So come find us. We'll answer questions, and I'm going to turn over to Randy real quick.
So I'm Randy Brewer. I have been in Nashville since 1992 when I was an intern. And I just want everyone that loved this tonight, I know everything's not perfect here at View. There's a lot of things that we're still learning. But if you love this experience, please tell all the other filmmakers in Nashville and Memphis, in Chattanooga and Atlanta to come up here and take a tour. Tell your clients to come by. Because if you don't get in here and actually experience this, Nashville is like, this is huge for us to have this. I don't know if you realize this, but like, you know, people in LA are wishing there was more of these there. There's not enough of them. So like, this is a big deal for us to have this type of technology that came out of Tampa with guys like Daniel and Tim that founded the company and built this whole thing, and Megan, that we've got one of the best production, groups here. Grant, all of
for
our
Megan
people
and the
here.
Nashville team.
I just want you to know it's a great place to work. So please tell more people, tweet it out, whatever you do, on your social media. If you're old school like me, you write a letter and put it in the mail and tell your mama to come by. So, but if you need to answer any questions, I'm Randy Brewer again. Just come by and say hello, and I'd love to talk to you guys. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thanks, Randy. And also make sure you follow us on social media. We are doing these events here in Nashville and across all of our different studios. And so if you happen to find yourself in Tampa, Orlando, or Vegas, definitely make sure you come and visit our studios there. And then keep an eye out on social media for the different events we got going on. And with that, I definitely want to thank Nathan and Contrast Films for coming and supporting this event. Let's give it up for them. And then also Citation Support. Right next door, they provided all of the lighting gear for this event. So a huge shout out to them. With that, we are going to be hanging out for a little while. If you haven't already had a beer or a drink, make sure you grab them back there. And then feel free to come and get a closer look at the set before we tear it all down. Because, you can play around with the camera a little bit and just walk into the set. And, we'll be here for questions. So thank you so much for attending, and we hope to see you at the next one.